And greetings. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I am on location here in the Palmetto State, here in the great state of South Carolina, where I'm going to be, along with the director of TPUSA, Faith Lucas Miles. We're going to be hosting a Q&A, a live Q&A here on the campus of the University of South Carolina a little bit later on tonight. Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre back there in Des Moines in our home studios. We are brought to you by our friends over at Jace Medical. You know, we've spoken a lot about Jace since they came on board here at the Blaze, right as we were in the throes of the scamdemic. And they were concerned. They came to us because they were concerned what they saw the system do to venerable medications like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. And that's where they came up with the Jace case, where they wanted to make sure people had backups of some of the most venerable and important antibiotics in all of human history, and that's what the Jace case does. And you can expand it now with total preparedness solutions that are tailored to fit you and your needs and your lifestyles. You can even include the aforementioned ivermectin into your Jace case as well. And there's more exciting news and options coming soon because the doctors at Jace, they're always working to come up with new ideas to make your emergency readiness even stronger than it was before. So enter the promo code DACE at checkout for a discount on your order. That's the promo code DACE, D-E-A-C-E, for a discount on your order when you go to jace.com. That's promo code DACE at jace.com for a discount on your order. All right, coming up on today's show, Jack Posobiec from Real America's Voice is going to join us at the bottom of the hour. We have lots of things to talk to Jack about, not the least of which, of course, he was at the White House yesterday for the commissioning ceremony for Charlie Kirk posthumously receiving the Medal of Freedom from President Trump. We'll talk to Jack about that and more. And the next hour, Theology Thursday, Chapter 11, we're going to get more in-depth to a debate that has been raging yet again. It's something that's been debated throughout the history of Christendom, and then dispensationalism kind of became the default for, say, the last 75, 80 years, at least of what most Americans knew or understood about these questions. But these questions are now being posited and posed again, and Paul's going to tackle more of these kinds of questions in Chapter 11 as we begin that in our verse-by-verse study of Romans, talking about what now happens to Israel and the Jewish people in light of the advent of Christianity and the Christian church. So we'll get into that starting with Theology Thursday next hour. But before we do, here's Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by ripping the Band-Aid off.
President, you're meeting with President Xi in a few weeks.
Yeah.
If you can't come to an agreement or a deal at that meeting, are we in for a sustained trade war with China?
Well, you're in one now. Look, we have 100% tariff. If we didn't have tariffs, we would be exposed as being a nothing. We would have no defense.
President Trump made those comments about the ongoing standoff between Washington and Beijing over trade. First time in my memory, the upper echelons of the administration have used the term trade war to describe the ongoing back and forth, which comes after Beijing last week tried to basically put the entire global supply chain for any sort of technology in a stranglehold. Trump comments at the White House came at a news conference commemorating the wrap-up of Operation Summer Heat, cracking down on violent crime in the nation's cities. They're touting over 8,000 arrests of violent criminals. The government shutdown is now firmly into week 3, and House Speaker Mike Johnson says the Democrats' list of demands is only growing.
The $500 million to liberal news outlets, $24.6 million of your hard-earned dollars as a taxpayer for climate resilience in Honduras, $13.4 million for civic engagement in Zimbabwe, $3.9 million for LGBTQI plus democracy grants in the Western Balkans, $2.9 million of your dollars for desert locust risk reduction in the Horn of Africa, $2 million for, quote, organizing for feminist democratic principles in Africa.
Nancy Pelosi, your thoughts?
Why did you refuse the National Guard on January 6th?
Shut up. I did not refuse the National Guard. The president didn't send it. Why are you coming here with Republican talking points?
At the Supreme Court, oral arguments were held yesterday in a case that could overturn the Voting Rights Act and wipe out Democrat-held congressional districts in certain areas of the country. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson says having different levels of melanin in your skin makes you disabled.
The ADA. Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act against the backdrop of a world that was generally not accessible to people with disabilities. Congress said the facilities have to be made equally open to people with disabilities if readily possible. I guess I don't understand why that's not what's happening here. The idea in Section 2 is that we are responding to current day manifestations of past and present decisions that disadvantage minorities and make it so that they don't have equal access to the voting system. Right? They're disabled.
Headline from the Babylon Bee. Clarence Thomas gently explains to KBJ that not all black people are disabled, just her. We go to the state of Maine, where a man showed up to an Augusta School District board meeting with a few female activists in tow.
They're covered. You feel uncomfortable? Because that's what these young girls feel like when a boy walks into the locker room and starts unchanging in front of them. Yeah, you feel uncomfortable, right? Feel uncomfortable, huh?
For those of you listening, this man by the name of Nick Blanchard excoriates the school board for allowing policies to continue which allow dudes to undress and change in women's locker rooms. While he's speaking, a few other activists get up in front of the board and start stripping down, met by the protestations of the board members.
Feel uncomfortable, huh?
Learning Chinese today. Today's phrase is, we'll allow it.
我们允许.
In New York City, communist mayoral candidate Zoran Mamdani says if he's elected, get ready to have even more money confiscated by the city government.
So a lot of individuals in this city pay more than 50% of their income in taxes. When you talk about a fair share, how much more than that? What is the fair share? What's the number?
I've said that we should increase personal income taxes by 2%.
Is fair?
And my point is this:
give up more than half of your income. That's
if you're making $1 million in New York City or more than that, you can afford to pay 2% more. And the reasons you can afford to do so is because that money will be used to better your quality of life as well.
And finally, has AI gone too far? You be the judge.
James, take a look at what you've won. Whoa, a brand new treadmill. Well, go on, test it out. All right, Terrence, let's show him what he's won.
Oh, man.
That's a brand new television. Well, take my word for it, it looks good. Now, Cassie, you ready to see what you just won?
Yes!
All right, let's show her. Well, now you got it. Go on. Janet, you've done well at the wheel. Now let's see what you've won. Open that curtain.
Oh, my God.
Lifetime supply of weight loss shots and not a moment too soon.
And that's what happened while we were away.
I had not seen that. Holy crap. That is oh my gosh, that's incredible. Take my word for it. That's the podcast. Oh my gosh. Absolutely one of the funniest things I've seen so far this year. That is incredible. Holy cow. Folks, everyone knows that college can be a major investment. That's why Aaron's montage is brought to you by ChristianCollegeGuide.com. It's the free, easy-to-use resource that does the work for you to make sure you find a school that shares your values. That's right. You can't even take for granted the Christian school shares your values. So this online directory of over 250 Christian colleges and universities, it's a one-stop shop. It lists all the basics such as acceptance rates, tuition costs, and academic majors. But since you're looking for a Christian college, you really want to know also about the school's faith commitments, its campus policies, and its spiritual life. And all that info is going to help you find a college you can trust for your kids. So folks, this is the definitive guide to Christian higher education, and it's completely free. So if you or someone you know is considering college, go to ChristianCollegeGuide.com to create a free user profile and get started today. That's ChristianCollegeGuide.com. All right, I think I have, gentlemen, I think I've regained my composure so we can have a serious conversation because that was absolutely hilarious. Here's what's also hilarious. So we are primarily, our perspective on this show is biblical worldview. So let's look at a couple of things that Aaron posited in his rundown today, gentlemen, from a biblical worldview. Let's start with Ketanji. again, race as we understand it in our godless culture is not a biblical construct. Race as we understand it is not a biblical construct. The Creator reveals in his word that the world is divided first between Jews and Gentiles. And now, in the post-ascension, post-resurrection world, it's divided, between sinners and saints. Those are the primary lines of demarcation and delineation within a biblical worldview. And that's not really, the language is different, but fundamentally the same. I mean, what was the difference between a Jew and a Gentile? A Jew had, as Paul wrote, Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. So they had the word of God, right? They practiced the ritual of circumcision as a means by which to testify to that to the rest of the world. We practice communion and baptism today. All of us do. And then some of our sects, like Todd's Catholicism, practice more in terms of ritual, but those two are practiced by every variation of Christian orthodoxy since the beginning of the faith. So right away, when we start talking about dividing people or seeing people primarily because of a quote-unquote race, to put this another way, when we as humans decide that we are going to divide and determine people on the basis of a value that the God who creates humans has not revealed and does not posit and does not provide for, we are right away in heretical territory. We have right away stepped into ye be like God. We have right away said, you know what? Oh man, Jehovah, my guy, you missed this one. Sorry, King. We're already in that territory. We're already doing that. So zany hijinks are going to ensue once we begin to do that. And what some of you will be old enough to remember is we have gone from those who did this in order to be racist, that we now have those who do this in order to be racialist. If you look at the fundamental claims that Ketanji made yesterday at the U.S. Supreme Court, speaking on behalf of the woke racialism in America, her claims are not fundamentally any different from a worldview standpoint. Alliteration wins every time. Ketanji and the KKK are the same. They're beginning with the exact same worldview. Because of their melanin level, blacks are, quote, disabled. This is what the KKK said for poll taxes, why blacks could not vote, shouldn't vote. Lesser beings, based on the melanin levels in their skin, they're disabled. They can't be trusted. That's why, racists would often refer to black men as boy, a means by which to demean them, that they're lesser, even though they're also a grown man. Ketanji is articulating the exact same premise. It is for a different conclusion. But the premise is the same. In the case of the KKK, they agreed. In fact, we could take much of what Ketanji said yesterday at the U.S. Supreme Court, and if I told you that Jim Bob Cooter Scott, chairman of the West Virginia KKK in 1928, said this, you'd probably believe it. It's not really any different, because it's not. The conclusion is different. In the case of the KKK, the idea that blacks were lessers because of their melanin, disabled, was justification in their minds for diminishing them and their humanity. Ketanji is also agreeing with the KKK that blacks are disabled. Now, she is saying it's because this has been foisted upon them by an oppressive society, and therefore their victim status that they are born into and inherit gives them, based on their melanin levels, gives them an ability to have benefits of the doubts and benefits that everyone else is not entitled to. And in fact, if you don't agree with that, you're part of the system that has practiced this oppression, and so you should actually be treated even lesser as a result. Fundamentally, the worldview of Ketanji and the KKK are the same. They are the same worldview because they come from the same source, the father of lies. They are attempting to introduce a construct. This is not any different than the trans madness. You are introducing a construct of identity into the creation that the Creator did not bestow nor reveal. And so what you get when you do that is madness. And you can call it the rainbow jihad, you can call it trainee madness, you can call it racism, you can call it racialism. They're really all the same because they're all from the same source. They all came off the same whiteboard in the same pit of hell. They just draw different conclusions. But they're fundamentally the same. Gentlemen, do you have any thoughts on that before I move on to the next topic I want to address? New York City.
It is the year of our Lord 2025 that Steve just laid that out for you. Let me take you back now to show another angle of how absurd this entire thing is. It was 125-ish years ago, late 19th, early 20th century, that two men that when Steve and I were going to elementary and middle school, we learned about on the regular. And they were Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And these were very intelligent men, I think obviously experiencing real racism. And they had different takes on what it would take to have Black America flourish. And they felt duty-bound, but in different ways, to make sure that they established that excellence. Booker T. Washington believed that the excellence of the common man had to be established. Just regular Joes, getting a job, paying the bills, having a family, getting access to that. W.E.B. Du Bois believed it was at the elite level and he was more in line with something akin to affirmative action, access to the levers of power so that all could flourish, top down, bottom up. But both of them believed that they had to establish excellence 125 years ago, when they had far more in the way of real grievance in terms of racism. This is why progressivism is a term that we just automatically better as we go along. Now, a woman on the Supreme Court says blacks are, by definition, functionally retarded, and we can't establish excellence. That's what's happening here. It's insane. You should dismiss it because it's evil.
You look at the first murder in the Bible, born out of what? Envy, jealousy. Envy and jealousy.
Covetousness.
You look at this argument that, I want you to keep that in mind as a backdrop. You look at this argument, I'm using air quotes for those of you listening, from Ketanji Brown Jackson. This is the same argument that the vaccine cult makes. Have you ever heard of a product whose efficacy depends on not necessarily whether or not you take it, but whether or not everybody else does? Mm-hmm. That doesn't sound very efficacious. It's a similar type of argument, again, using air quotes. Your disability status is based upon whether or not you have melanin, no, or don't have melanin, no, but whether or not everybody else does or doesn't. That's the argument that she's making. Mm-hmm. And it's always born out of the other, the envy, the covetousness, the jealousness. So this is why it's crucially important that you take this back to the foundation, like you just said, Steve. Why are the KKK and KBJ making the same variations of the same argument? It's because their origin is the same, and it's from the father of lies. If you break this down, it's utterly nonsensical. Utterly nonsensical, stupid, retarded, whatever term you want to use for it. But you become stupid and retarded, and in our unrepentant, unregenerate state, we will always fall for these types of arguments. But when it's done at a societal level, you get crap like this over and over and over again. Apply it to any issue.
So let's get to topic 2. And one of the reasons we changed our approach, and I had already agreed to go on this tour before Charlie's martyrdom, but obviously, in the wake of it, some of our approaches, this was originally going to be a midday event outdoors here at the University of South Carolina today. But because of security, it's going to be a nighttime event here this evening instead. But as we've all of us that have done these tours, whether it's for the wider Turning Point action or TPUSA Faith in my case, these are all dedicated to Charlie. And there's very little that, and I think my disagreement with Charlie on New York City probably stems from the fact he was just a better human being than me. Okay. Because Charlie was deeply concerned, as he said publicly and privately to those of us who knew him, about the example it would set if New York City elected an open Islamist as its mayor, and the signal that would send. And he was every bit correct to be concerned about that. And I don't want to make it seem like I'm not concerned about it. But I want to go back to the clip that, Aaron, you had in your montage. All right. And the Fox News host is asking him, what's the tax rate for everybody to pay their fair share and get all the blessings of government that Zohan wants to bestow upon thee? And he said 52%. Did you notice what she said the people of New York City are already paying? 50%. So we've got a lot of headlines in righty media this morning about how the Islamist mayor in waiting in New York City wants to make sure that New Yorkers are paying a majority of their wages and taxes. But what we're not telling you in a lot of those headlines is the baseline. They're already paying half. They're already paying half. This is not much of a step for New Yorkers. And a lot of those rich New Yorkers that Zohan says can fund everything, they're going to vote for him. They're going to vote for him. And while I'm concerned about the message of what this means when they vote for him, and they will, I think we also need to recognize that this is a comeuppance. This is a reckoning. This is not out of nowhere. I mean, New York City did not go from, hey, we just built LaGuardia to, here's your Islamist mayor. This is the city that 25 years ago saw up close and personal with Zohan's, who also has, I have no opinion on whether Hamas should, obey the ceasefire or not. He said in that exact same interview, by the way. This exact same city, many of its adults were alive to remember to go check on bulletin boards to see if their friends or loved ones were in the rubble of 9/11. And now 25 years later, not even a generation has passed. And they're essentially about to elect as mayor the political equivalent of one of those planes flying into those towers. They didn't go 0 to 60, folks. They're the current governor of New York thinks you should be able to kill your baby at any point, provide a cuticle of a pinky nail dangling from mom's uterus. And so did the former governor of New York, who then also killed a bunch of people's grandparents in nursing homes during COVID. This is a logical next step for this city. It's not stunning. It's not out of nowhere. It's actually it's just actually the next logical conclusion. You already agreed to pay half, so why wouldn't you pay 2% more? Why wouldn't you do it? You're getting what you want. And one of the great quotes from John Calvin ever: when God wants to punish a rebellious people, he gives them wicked rulers. More rebellious than to live in the rubble of 9/11. How many people have left New York in the last few years to move to Florida, for example? To live, to remember the rubble of 9/11 and importing this Islamist worldview into your country, into your state. You saw it up close and personal and more painfully than any of the rest of us did. And then you turn around over the course of the next half generation and just matriculate it and import it into your water table anyway, voluntarily. That is the very definition of a rebellious people. You saw evil up close and personal in ways none of the rest of us that don't live in New York City have ever seen. And you turned right around and said, you know what? Maybe we should just try taking it piecemeal. Just having planes just fly into two towers and kill 3,000 people all at once, it's a little unseemly. What if we just kind of did this on the drip and on the down low? So we're going to vote for the mayoral equivalent of the planes flying into the towers. Vote for that. This is what Calvin meant, gentlemen, when he said, when God wants to punish a rebellious people, he gives them wicked rulers. We are watching this paradigm play out right now. So yes, Charlie was correct. The symbolism of this is terrible. But this is also, you're watching divine justice happening here. You're watching Romans 1 play itself out. You're watching people being given over now to their own depraved minds. The hand of resistance, the common grace, the natural law has been removed. And now you have been given over. Your thoughts on that, men?
This is not an either or, it's a both and. You are absolutely right, Steve. And Charlie is absolutely right. I would honestly, it's far more than symbolism, though. It is, once again, them proving that their resolve, generally, man to man, is better than ours. Because it was just, yesterday, the day before, we were talking about the excuses of Kevin Stitt in Oklahoma. You know, they have trump cards that they are willing to play. That unless and we have a guy named Donald Trump who just has no F's left to give, and obviously. It seems like we have a bullpen that we were worried we certainly didn't have in the first term. So things have gotten better, but in the long run, you can't have a city like New York in the hands of men like Andami and have that not bleed into the rest of the country. If at the very least there's not a one-to-one match of resolve. We just cannot have that kind of mindset in Oklahoma. We cannot have our universities in red states look like Austin, Texas. We are going to have a sense of taking back our own, at least in our own red states. If New York is going to look like that and willingly and happily, everybody who lives in the red states has now got to realize, if you're a liberal, you're not going to get to run Austin, Texas like you've run it anymore. States are going to have to step in and take over. If that sounds like the heavy hand of some sort of tyranny to you, no, tyranny is actually being taunted within your own so-called red state by the likes of Mandami. They're already there in Texas, and you've got excuses. That right here, look at what we just hired. We hired an illegal immigrant with a track record a mile long. We have to get serious because they're deadly serious.
God is both merciful and just. And one of those attributes is going to be felt by the people of New York City soon. And I'm not saying it's just that the people who tried to fight against this are going to experience this, but en masse, that city is broken. It's broken. They already tried a socialist in Bill de Blasio. I guess they're trying an Islamist now. So God is both merciful if Mom Donnie doesn't get in, and he is just if he does get in.
Amen. Back here, live and on demand on the Steve Deace Show here on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I'm in Columbia, South Carolina, on location today. I'll be conducting an Ask Me Anything for TPUSA Faith with the director of TPUSA, Lucas Miles, later tonight at the University of South Carolina. So very much looking forward to that. For Charlie, for Christ, for country, very much looking forward to that. We were going to have Jack Posobiec on the show today. He texted us a little while ago to let us know he's actually been called into emergency subduty on Charlie's show. So, we're going to still discuss, we're going to reschedule Jack as soon as we can. But in a minute, we're still going to discuss one of the topics that I wanted to relay because I know Jack, as a devout Catholic, would have a serious take on this. And so maybe we'll use Todd, we'll profile him and have him kind of stand in for Jack here in a few minutes after I tell you about our friends over at Preborn. You know, the headlines remind us daily that truth is being silenced, and when truth is silenced, lives are at risk. Imagine this, you're a single mom, you've got 2 children, no money, no support. Find out you're pregnant again, this time with triplets. That was a real story. That was Veltasia's reality. She was alone, overwhelmed, afraid. She was considering committing murder against her own children out of fear. But then she walked into a Preborn Network clinic. She was surrounded by love, resources, but also the truth that her baby's lives mattered, that those heartbeats are real persons. Today, all 3 of her children are alive because truth triumphed over fear, and someone like you helped her to find that truth by writing a check to Preborn. And you know what? For as little as $28, you can fund an ultrasound that might be the next life-transforming, soul-transforming story like the one we just shared with you. And this is why truth matters now more than ever. All right? So make your tax-deductible donation today. Pick up your phone, dial pound 250, say the keyword baby on your mobile phone. That's pound 250, keyword baby on your mobile phone. Or keep it simple. Donate securely at preborn.com/Steve. That's preborn.com/Steve. And do it now because life matters. All right, there was a story, gentlemen, that broke last night. And it's one of those stories, because I have right now, and I have to thank Todd Erzin for this, okay? And I mean thank in the most sardonic, cynical definition of the term.
Is there any other
All right?
kind?
Because Todd is embroiled in all of these deep debates, which when I see them in my feed, honestly, they don't look very deep. Anyway, all of these deep debates about whether or not Catholics are actually Christians, right? Catholicism is Christianity. I now am routinely littered in my algorithm, in my For You. Aaron, are you seeing this?
Yes.
We're the dumbest takes on every side of this. And to be honest, there's more dumb takes on the Protestant side that I've seen. But all the dumb takes on this are littering my feed now all of the time. All of the time. Aaron, are you getting this as well because of Todd?
For the most part. Thank you, Todd.
You're welcome.
Yes. Yes. So, listen, by the way, it's not as if what's going on in our culture meant that there was all kinds of options for smart and intelligent debate that I'm missing out on. All right, probably would have just been replaced by a different form of mass stupidity, if not for what Todd was stoking out there. So I am, but
oh, to be fair, I'm not stoking. I'm responding to the stoking.
Oh, yes. Forgive me, of course. And neither can Todd be trolled. So there's that too.
Correct.
All right. So
I see what you did there.
Because of that,
yeah.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I see what you did there.
You see what I did there? Yes. Okay. Because of that, when I saw this story, I thought for sure it was not true.
Oh, I knew it was true.
And I thought for sure, all right, Reformation Day is every day, 1517. Okay, which, by the way, that's a pretty cool name for an X account. I may make that my own burner. Anywho, all right. But I thought for sure Reformation Day is every day, 1517. Had just made this whole thing up. And it had proliferated into my feed. So I had to check this. So I, of course, went to the ultimate source. Grok. Went to the AI. And Grok said, no, this story is true. What story am I talking about? The Vatican has installed prayer rooms for Muslims who are traveling through within the Apostolic Library. Todd, do you know what? Can you explain to our audience what the Apostolic Library is?
Well, it's one of the most incredible libraries in the history of the world, which would make sense. It's the oldest surviving institution in the world. It's collected all manner of resources, Catholic and otherwise. So it would make sense that it is a place that all manner of people worldwide want access to, whether they're Catholic or Christian or not,
right,
just as a baseline.
So inside of this renowned institution, which, if you don't understand what the term Apostolic Library means, how about just the chronicles of humanity? The annals of our species, basically, are located here. Inside of this, the Vatican has installed prayer rooms for Muslims. And I thought to myself, oh, hell no. So we're going to have an American Pope who will have nothing to say about the most high-profile American events. MLK stood out on a porch in Memphis in 1968. Nothing to say. Nothing. Now, I looked that up, too. He has said something privately. Pope Leo XIV did express his sympathy to the U.S. ambassador privately. Some reporters noted this just like there's a presidential log of who gets talked to and a kind of a summary of what gets said. The Vatican provides this for popes. And people who follow this, as they're on the Catholic beat, noted that they saw a reference to this within this record, and they asked the church to confirm that this happened. And a few days later, it did. So he did express some private sympathies to the Kirk family and to his widow Erica, to the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. But those are the only comments and thoughts. Of course, he does have a lot of public thoughts on why you should give up your country and open borders. He's got a lot of public thoughts about that. But no public thoughts whatsoever to express about what is the most... Charlie was not murdered in private. This is the most public, most viewed murder in all of human history. Up until this point. And it occurred specifically because of Charlie's Christian faith. And the effectiveness of which he communicated that and shared and spread that within his vast and still growing sphere of influence. So we have no public expression of that. None. Nothing public to say. An American Pope has nothing public to say about the most public murder in human history. And the victim just so happened to be the first true, real, high-profile American martyr since MLK. But we are going to publicly make sure everybody knows Muslims can come in here and pray with prayer mats. And my question to Jack, if he didn't get rushed into immediate guest hosting duties on Charlie's show today, would have been, explain this to me. So, Todd, that's my question to you. Explain this to me. Like I'm 5.
Well, I've said it before. My patience ran out with him several weeks back after Francis. And despite, when he had happened to break alive that he was Pope on this show, and we saw some troubling things, but the desire to move past Francis, suspend judgment, allow this thing to cook a little bit, but it is clear that this is, you may as well call it Francis 2.0, and that's bad. It's, I've called it Pensian. It's just weak. It's weakness, and that's what Christianity has become. It's become therapeutic. It's become another version of the Oprah show. It's pathetic. It's forfeit. And listen, the simple fact of the matter is you have to be, we are commanded as part of our faith to be wise as serpents. Like I told you about the library before, why it would make sense that Muslims would want to come there in theory, in good faith, to have access to books that can only be found there. But here's where the wisest, okay, it's prayer time. Fine. Go walk out the door. Go do what you got to do wherever you got to do it. Come back in. That's all right. But we are going to make sure that you have a prayer room. They're playing you. They're just counting on your weakness. They always win this game. The cross is the opposite of weakness. And the simple fact of the matter is, it doesn't mean you're mean or unkind by not giving their own prayer room. It means you are loyal to your God, the one true God. And while this is where Steve's point, I will love my neighbor as I love myself, I will, in good faith, grant access to this place in the hopes that the Holy Spirit claims them for his own. But I will not mock my God. But here, this is not new. We've been mocking God, Catholics and Protestants alike, for a very, very long time, because we have, just like in Old Testament times, over and over and over again, we have decided to fashion the idols that we like better. And right now, it's comfort and forfeit kindness and all of this nonsense. So that's how this happened. It's not new. Nonsense like this is going to keep happening. We're going to continue to bless blocks of ice and do the seamless garment nonsense, equivocating, rapist, illegal immigrants coming over is the same thing as killing a baby. I mean, Steve, you started off the show about talking about New York, and this is just same thing here. You keep lying like this, you're just going to get more garbage.
What are the odds that on a forthcoming visit to Mecca,
there it is,
the Pope will be provided space to make sure he's able to conduct?
That's what I'm talking
about.
Do
they have a prayer room at the Black Box? The answer is no, because non-Muslims can't even go to Mecca.
This is about being wise as serpents. It's so obvious. And then you, as a Catholic, there's just like with the stupid block of ice thing. Actually, we bless water all the time. Here, they're doing this thing. Actually, it's just being kind. No, stop it. Stop it, stop it, stop it. The Pope is stupid for letting this happen. You're stupid for explaining it away. Have a higher standard. If you're not going to have a higher standard in the name of God, none of your other standards matter at all.
So I went and looked this up as well. When Robert Francis Prevost was a cardinal, that's Pope Leo XIV, before he became Pope. As a cardinal in 2020, he did share a social media post from Bishop Michael Burbridge of Arlington, Virginia, which prayed for George Floyd's soul and for his family after his killing by police in Minneapolis, also calling for peace, healing, and harmony amid the ensuing protest against racism.
Well, that's one of the ones we read live, right? I think that's one of the one that gave us pause. Yeah.
So there was a genuflection when he was a cardinal for George Floyd. As Pope, nothing. For an American, by the way, whose favorite sports team was also in the city of Chicago, the Pope's hometown. Nothing for an American martyr.
I'll reset again.
We've got plenty for George Floyd.
Just like an entire generation of people had to wander around endlessly in the desert and be killed off before they could enter the promised land, like my deacon friend said, who is an 80-year-old man himself. It's his generation. And he said, my generation just has to die before things get better. Because our leadership is just endemically prone to this level of forfeit Christianity.
Well, I said after watching Charlie's memorial, it's very clear given the state, and I said it on this show and every forum I've been on, it's very clear given the state of the evangelical church And it's how mired in church growth and third wayism it was that the Lord just bypassed the pulpit, just went around that. And he's done that before. I mean, the Lord has just bypassed the religious structures that were put into place to do a job and refused to do it. I mean, the stones are going to cry out. The word's going out. We can't stop it. What we can do, to me, I think the greatest explicitly biblical understanding of the sovereignty of God is in the one book of the Bible that doesn't mention him by name, and that's Esther. And it's when Esther's uncle, Mordecai, comes to her and says, hey, you're queen. You must now go to the king. Now, the last queen that went to the king, this is how Esther got to become queen. She violated protocol and got executed. That's why there was now an opening. All right, and so Mordecai is saying, hey, you're going to have to risk yourself and speak up for the genocide of your people that Haman is planning. But here's what he says to her. He doesn't tell her the whole thing's up to her. He says, now, if you don't do what you're called to do here, salvation will come to the Jews by another means. Meaning the entire plan of Israel is not rested on, they're not sitting there in heaven biting their nails saying, whatever will this Esther chick do? It's not how it works. And so he said, hey, salvation will come to the Jews by another means, but you, my dear niece, I fear for what it means for you and our family if you do not do what you are supposed to do. So this, just like you heard Aaron say last segment, that the Lord can, it does immanence and transcendence at the same time. It can be both alarming to see an Islamist take over as the mayor of New York. It can also be a proclamation of the justice of God at the exact same time. Applies here. There will be accountability for these institutions that will not do what God has called and entrusted them to do. At the same time, they don't get to stall the word of God. They don't get to stall the kingdom of God. It'll just commence by another means. And you're just watching collectively. The Lord is just bypassing, especially in the West. I can't speak for the whole world. I'm a Westerner. But in the West, you are watching the Lord just bypass the pulpits en masse on an institutional basis. And the truth will go out, and the faith will go out. Whether that's Jack Posobiec waving his rosary at Charlie's Memorial or Rob McCoy giving an altar call. The word does not return void. Hour 2 is next. All right, back here with Hour 2, live and on demand here on the Steve Deace Show, powered by Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I'm on location here the next couple of days at the University of South Carolina here in Columbia, South Carolina. Todd and Aaron will be back there inside of our posh studios there in suburban Des Moines. You can let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox by emailing the show, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. You can follow me at Steve Deace Show or on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Please remember to subscribe to our new YouTube channel, at Deace Show on YouTube. Again, that's at Deace Show, DEACE. At Deace Show on YouTube. And then finally, a lot of you, though, follow the podcast. Thank you very much. Please hit subscribe or on Apple iTunes follow to make sure that you get each and every one of our episodes downloaded into your podcast feed each and every time we do one of those. You can also leave us a 5-star review, and tens of thousands of you have, so please keep those going as well. And thanks to each and every one of you for each and every one of those. And thanks to our friends over at Beam, who finally cracked the code. What would stop Steve Deace from having to get up to pee in the middle of the night? It's Beam's Dream Powder, proudly founded in America, run by people who share our values like hard work, integrity, getting the job done, delivering results. It's a healthy nighttime blend packed with science-backed ingredients, not carbs or sugars, so don't worry about that. And these ingredients are shown to improve sleep so that you can wake up refreshed, ready to go and take on the day. When you find Dream, I promise you everything's going to change. You're going to start sleeping through the night without tossing and turning, wake up energized, and you didn't get up in the middle of the night to pee twice. It's a total game changer, and here's the deal to get you started. Beam is giving you all the ultimate Patriot discount of up to 40% off just to try their best-selling Dream Powder that comes in lots of different flavors, and you can get up to 40% off now for a limited time. Go to Shop Beam, as in laser beam, shopbeam.com/Steve. Use the code Steve at checkout for that big discount. All right, that's Shop, BEAM, as in Mary, beam.com/Steve. That's shopbeam.com/Steve, and use the promo code Steve to get that 40% off so you'll sleep better, wake up stronger, show up ready for your work, your family, and your country, because when you're well rested, you're unstoppable.
Steve,
so tonight,
Steve, really quick there was some fake news I need to correct. I am not actually in the posh Steve Day studios right now to appropriately honor my faith this Theology Thursday. I am actually inside a Muslim prayer room right now, just so you know.
Assalamu alaikum, my friend.
Blessed Eid Mubarak to all of you.
You're going to be a different type of prostrate than you were a couple of weeks ago, Todd. You were laying down. Now you need that prayer mat up on the table there. You know, we can do that.
Oh,
and if
I could have gotten away with that, I would have.
And if you keep holding to that Trinitarian view, they're going to call you a polytheist, and they'll put you in a prostrate position too, my friend. I can promise you that. All right. So tonight we're doing the cost of courage. Ask Me Anything for TPUSA Faith here on the campus of the University of South Carolina. Looking very much forward to that. Where is this going to be tonight? Let me look. I just know it's going to be on the campus. What's the name of the building? I've got the little doohickey here. It's at the Close Hip Building, room 008. The Close, like CLOSE, Close Hip, CLOSEHIPP, the Close Hip Building, room 008, tonight on the campus of the University of South Carolina, starting at 7 p.m. here in Columbia, South Carolina. And if I don't get at least one question asking me why I'm a Zionist cuck, I'm just going home. That's what I came here for. I came here to be accused of being a Zionist cuck. That's the whole reason I made the trip. Oh, and for Charlie. That's the other reason. But really, line them up, all right? Because I'm anxious for those questions. I just want to warn you before you try to corner me with this. I ain't like the others you're used to cornering with stuff like this. I ain't like them. So, buckle up. And I use that as a preamble to all those other guys you do this to. They're really nice. I'm more like you than I am them. I'm just not as dumb as you. So you're welcome to bring your questions on these topics. Was that over at the top? Was that okay? Can I get a ruling on that, gentlemen?
Depends on whose top we're talking about here.
Indeed. All right.
That seemed legit. I mean, conversation, maybe it'll go in the pumpkin spice direction. You never know. Stay on your toes, Deace. That's all I'm saying.
Indeed.
You are a multifaceted man. If they've done any research on you, it could be enlightening on so many different levels.
Just understand, I'm a big believer that snotty questions I'm entitled to give you snotty answers. The Lord did it all the time. Well, I mean, if I'll tell you what.
To be fair, if they ask you a non-snotty question, you'll give them a snotty answer. So,
very true. Very true. Now, if we want to have this conversation constructively, I'm all about it. Because I think it's a very worthwhile debate. The irony of this is a lot of the questions that, some people like Tucker are getting attacked for asking now, I asked some of these questions like 20 years ago when I was first starting out. It's just it was in Des Moines, Iowa, so nobody knew. Okay? So again, I'm not against asking questions. You can ask any question you want. The debate is not over which questions you want to ask. The debate should be, where are we going for the answers? So in Romans chapter 11, and I looked this over for quite a while last night before I went to bed, because this chapter, I think, if we're going to rightly divide it the most precisely we can, should be taken in its entirety. But I think the issue with us doing that is there's about 3 or 4 subplots that come out of this chapter that I think might get glommed over if we do that. And so I wanted to come up with what do I think is a good cutoff point for now. And I think we're going to go verses 1 through 10. And I mentioned that during the break, and then Aaron, you told me that Dr. Sproul in his Roman study, he took verses 1 through 10 as a block of text as well. So I'm going to count that I'm in good company as we begin with this text. Now remember, this is Paul writing to truly the first diverse congregation in the history of Christianity. Rome is the first time that Jews and Gentiles en masse are worshiping together. Gentiles were allowed, meaning non-Jewish people, were allowed to worship the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay? But there were limitations on the amount of access, for example, as not being native Jews. There were limitations on how much access they were given even within the temple and the worship structure. Then the veil is torn after Christ, the Son of God, is crucified. Nothing that stands between us individually and a relationship with God other than our own sin, which Christ has now atoned for at the cross, if we recognize that. So this is the first time now that these two groups, unfettered, arm in arm, are worshiping together. And there's lots of questions about what does this mean? A lot of these Jewish believers are being disowned by their families for believing in this Yeshua as Messiah when their families believe he was a false Messiah. So they're wondering, wait, what happens to our loved ones? Is God's covenant canceled? Is it over? What does this mean? And then Gentiles are like, well, what does it mean now that you know, I'm a part of this community when I was excluded from it because of my sin for centuries? What does that mean? And am I a member fully in good standing? There were even some who tried to tell them that they still had to practice the law or get circumcised. Paul will address this with a group called the Judaizers in his letter to the church in Galatia, for example. So this is the backdrop of this conversation. All the questions that we're asking now and the debates we're having now, and I'm fine with the debate provided it is not a fig leaf excuse for you to be an anti-Semite. That's why if you come at me snotty, I'm going to get snotty back to find out if you are just genuinely curious, if you just genuinely distrust dispensationalism, or if you just are using that as a fig leaf for your anti-Semitism. For example, there were some people who claimed to be very concerned about Christians being caught up in the undertow of what Israel did in Gaza for the last 2 years, but have said those exact same people who pretended to be concerned have said nothing about the extermination of Christians by what's happening in Syria or what's happening in Nigeria right now, which kind of tells you maybe they weren't really concerned with Christian persecution. Maybe that was just a fig leaf to give them an excuse to be anti-Semitic without having it, that, you know, their nakedness out there in the open, like they're at my man's city council meeting that Aaron had in his montage, all right? So I'm a big believer in fleshing out false objections. If you come to me with a false objection, I'll expose it. So if you want to have a real debate about this and discussion about it, let's do it. But if it's to cover up the fact you just hate Jews, I'm going to pull your pants down. So be ready for that, okay? With that said, these are the words of St. Paul, starting in verse 1. I ask then, has God rejected his people? By no means, for I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin, one of the 12 tribes. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Do you not know what the scripture says of Elijah, maybe the greatest prophet of the entire Old Testament? Jews considered Elijah almost like a superhero, mythic-like figure. Do you not know what the scripture says of Elijah, how he appeals to God against Israel? Lord, they have killed your prophets, they have demolished your altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my life. But what is God's reply to Elijah? I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So too, at the present time, there is a remnant, chosen by grace. But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works, otherwise grace would no longer be grace. What then? Israel failed to obtain what it was seeking. The elect obtained it, or those whom God foreknew. The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened. As it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that would not see, and ears that would not hear, down to this very day. And David says, let their table become a snare and a trap, a stumbling block and a retribution for them. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see, and bend their backs forever. Now, the rest of this chapter further extrapolates and exposits what this really means. But because it brings up other subplots that I think also need to be addressed for now, we're going to park it here and have a general conversation about this and what Christianity has, for the most part, historically taught that this meant. And then what Christianity, for the most part, in this day and age, teaches what it means. Okay? So and then after that, after I give you the backdrop, all right, I'm just going to teach a theology class. I'm not going to take a position for now. I'm going to just teach a theology class of what the church in various eras has taught this meant, and I'm going to hand it over to Todd and Aaron and Dr. Scott Hahn and Dr. R.C. Sproul to take it from there. Okay? All right, so let's begin with what's often referred to as the historical view. Sometimes you'll hear people call this replacement theology. All right? And the historical view states that God primarily works through history through covenants. And that different covenants being fulfilled has essentially meant we've progressed to the new or the next era of history. And that the Mosaic covenant has been fulfilled. The nation of Israel's ultimate purpose was to bring forth Messiah, the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world. And that covenant is fulfilled. And that's one of the reasons why Jesus' final words at the cross are, it is accomplished or it is finished. And in light of that now, we are in a new covenant or a New Testament. And that the church of Christ is the primary vehicle now, not a nation state, but an institution, the only transcendent institution. You've heard me say this before on the show. The only transcendent institution God ever gave to humanity is the church. That the church transcends borders, nations, eras, customs. It is the thin place between heaven and earth. And it is now the primary dwelling place of the kingdom of God on earth, not a temple in Jerusalem or not a nation. And they take for that, okay, let me finish that. And that there is and will be a remnant of Jews who at the end of history, now what brings about the end of history? Not all. Then we would get into eschatology in a way more detailed and complicated conversation, because again, not everybody has the same views even within these two main views, right? And so, for example, Todd as a Catholic would be an amillennialist, which means that he by and large believes that the 1,000-year reign is symbolic, that we are in an era that the city of God, or the kingdom of God, but Augustine referred to it as the city of God in his most famous work articulating this, and the city of man basically do battle back and forth here on earth until Jesus returns, the master returns to settle accounts. There are some, now I can't remember what eschatology Sproul himself was, but a lot of people who love Sproul would call themselves post-millennialists. And they would believe that essentially the church is victorious on earth in bringing the kingdom of God on earth when the church finishes its work, finishes its mission. That is when Christ returns. Daddy does not come back to clean up our mess. All right? That through the church and the power of the Holy Spirit now, the church is victorious in human history. And when that mission is completed, the gospel's been taken to the ends of the earth, that is when Christ returns, and not a minute sooner. And one of the most famous groups of people who believed in this eschatology were called Puritans. They founded this country on that basis. When they wrote in the Mayflower Compact, they came here for the establishment of the Christian religion. They are literally articulating tenets like theonomy and others within postmillennialism, that these were their driving forces. They absolutely believed they could establish a Christian kingdom on the earth. They absolutely believed that, which is why so much of the founding of this country, even 150 years after the Puritans landed at Plymouth Rock, is imbued with Christian symbolism and imagery and theology. Okay? So that is the historical view. The historical view takes as its evidence from this chapter, Romans chapter 11. Okay? The idea that there is no more a nation state. That Israel is not a nation anymore and will never be again, at least from a prophetic viewpoint. That Israel instead is the remnant of Jews who at the end of the age, some now during this age, right? There's a small but very devoted cachet of Jews for Jesus or Messianic Jews. They represent that remnant. And then at the end of the age, a great harvest of those people. And that the nation of Israel, ultimately, as Paul says here, Israel failed to obtain what it was seeking. It rejected Messiah. And in its place now, that Israel's ultimate mission is fulfilled, and on top of the fact it rejected its Messiah, the church now stands as that thin place, that vessel between us and the kingdom of God. The primary adjudicator and home of the kingdom of God on earth. Then there were people, most of the church, not all, but most of the church had a variation of this view until about 180 years ago. Most of the church today, I know you're hearing a lot of skepticism about dispensationalism, but it is still the overwhelming view of believers today that are at least aware or active in these circles, I should say. All right. The dispensational view sees that God actually governs the affairs of this planet through what are called dispensations. And that they have a progressive notion, small p, small p, small p. And that as we get closer to the culmination of God's plan, God reveals more of these mysteries. Like Paul himself writes about the mystery of the church is now being revealed. They would take that as evidence for this. Okay? They would agree that the Jews, there's a few that believe in a thing called dual covenant theology, which is a heresy, according to Christians, that Jews have their own covenant and don't need their sins atoned for from Christ. That is a very small group of people. Overwhelmingly, dispensationalists do not believe that. All right? They would agree. All right? Jews also require the atonement of Christ at the cross for their sins. What they would say, though, because they would also take this and say that they have a broader context of what Romans 11 means from the words of Christ himself, like in his Olivet Discourse. They would say that the remnant that Paul is addressing here is the reconstituted nation of Israel that shows up on when that shows up on the world stage again. Okay, when you see the fig tree bloom. Okay, or is it the olive tree? I can't remember. When you see that blooming again. Okay, that means we're at the end of this dispensation and we're at the final one. This is the end of the age. And that the nation of Israel is that remnant. Not all of the nation. When you say things to a dispensationalist like, well, do you see how secular and pagan Israel is? They are aware of this. That's why dispensationalists send so many missionaries. My buddy Rob McCoy's been to Israel like 30 times. All right, that's why they send so many missionaries to Israel, because they acknowledge that. Not to mention, can you come up with another country that has a lot of homosexuality and abortion? Oh, yeah, ours. Okay, they would counter with that too. And they would say this is that tree is blooming again. So understand the signs of the times. This is now the remnant that was foretold in Romans 11. Is coming back. The Jews are coming back to their homeland. That tree is blooming again. And now this is the end of the age when that remnant will be revealed. The church will be raptured away. And some believe it'll happen, before the Great Tribulation begins, in the middle of it, or after it. But the church will be raptured away, taken away, having fulfilled its mission on the earth. And then God will turn his attention back to the Jewish people to finalize the still uncompleted covenant with them, all right, to fulfill it once and for all. As best as I can as a layman, and to make this stuff as simple to people as possible, are there any objections with how I just explained these two views that you guys would lobby, or anything you think I need to clarify?
I don't think so, but Aaron might have a greater sense of where things need to be parsed on this.
No, I think that's I'm just trying to think through everything here, any objections that people listening to this might have. But I think as best as you can, in about 15 minutes, that is the state of play for that view.
Okay. All right. So again, you have the historical view, which not all, but most of the church had, primarily between Augustine and the 19th century. Most of the church had the historical view. And then, since the 19th century, much of the church has the current dispensational view. And those are in very broad general terms. Much more could be said about this. Whole books and libraries are written on these topics. But for now, that's a good general overview of these two positions. And from there, gentlemen, I now hand it off to your tour guides. Who wants to go first?
I want to hear from Todd first, for sure.
Okay.
Well, most Catholics have a different sense of what it means to get in the weeds on this. Scott Hahn, I think, brings up 2 points that I found salient in using Elijah as Steve said, superhero status. And he's not, in terms of the length of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, how many chapters does the Elijah stories take up? Very, very few. But what he accomplishes while he's there is, rightly said, if you're going to give superhero status to one singular, it's him. But also within those very same few chapters, you have that level of, first he did the amazing thing, and then he's still scared. He still runs away. He's still in doubt. He cannot see the truth of the matter. And Scott Hahn says on that front, that it's striking that the remnant unknown to Elijah was a throng of the faithful from northern Israel, from among the very tribes that were considered lost in Paul's day. Since Elijah's ministry was conducted in the northern kingdom, the reader is prepared to see that the salvation of all Israel in Romans 11:26 will include the northern tribes. Now, you can read that as something very academic, but as I told you at the beginning of chapter 9, Scott Hahn says the language in 9 through 11 changes. He's constantly using Israel, whereas before that, chapter 1 through 8, he almost always uses the term Jews. These are fighting words to the modern Jew. Those people gave up a long time ago. They're not us anymore. There's a degree of certainty of that, like blood level certainty of that. And then for St. Paul to use the greatest of all prophets, reminding him of, great, but also fell into doubt and weakness. And then B, to remind him that even he couldn't see He was not able to understand. He saw, at the very best, he sees through a glass darkly. Faith means trusting my plan, God's plan. Just to know that there's a remnant and to take that on faith and not to know how it's going to be completed in full is an act of faith through the course of history corporately, but in each one of our lives. This is why why our individual faiths often become so shallow, because we simply don't expect that. I want answers. I want to know why I'm not comfortable. I want to feel sorry for myself. And I think that's one thing Scott Hahn is reminding the Jews here of, like, who, and Steve has done in other contexts, not just in our Roman study, but oftentimes reminds you, like, I'm God and you're not. My plan will be completed, as he just reminded you earlier, whether you, Esther, or somebody else, the Mordecai example. That's present in this, and then he gets, as you know, this is very much a love letter. St. Paul reaching out in these chapters, please, my people, trying. But love letters have, if you really love somebody, there's a lot of tough love, and so the last part, he says what he's trying to accomplish rhetorically, prophetically, is he assumes the role of a prophet who confronts and critiques Israel from within. He draws on his nation's sacred traditions to challenge those who presume that God is unconditionally obligated to bless Israel, even in times of national rebellion. True prophets insist that God is obligated to enforce the covenant by activating its sanctions on disobedience. The effect of this prophetic critique is that the comparison between Israel of Paul's day and the Israel of Elijah's day would have been deeply resented by Jewish opponents of the gospel, because it implies that Israel is in a state of apostasy. It's just reminding it, very much like with our prayer, Islamic prayer room discussion. He's just reminding him here, God will not be mocked. And it's, while I've begged and pleaded for 2 chapters to remind you who you are and who you are called to be, with the last chapter here, he's just simply giving them that grown man discussion. You guys are way out of line and you have very little time left to correct it.
All right, I'll have more to say on what Todd just mentioned, and we'll get to Dr. Sproul via Aaron here in a moment. Back here on the Steve Deace Show from Columbia, South Carolina, at least I am. Todd and Aaron are back there in our studios in Des Moines. We're brought to you by our friends over at Patriot Mobile. They have been doing the red parallel economy thing for more than a decade now. The space that thankfully more people are trying to get into, though, they were kind of the OGs. All right. And there's really only one provider out there that boldly stands in the gap for Americans who believe freedom is still worth fighting for. And that's Patriot Mobile, on top of the fact that they outpace the competition when it comes to technology. Patriot Mobile is one of the only carriers offering premium access to all 3 major U.S. networks that give you nationwide coverage and service that you can count on. It's Patriot Mobile. That's a service that our family uses. But they also offer unlimited data plans, mobile hotspots, international roaming, internet backup, and more. I mean, I just had to upgrade my phone on a Sunday. Got it taken care of with Patriot Mobile's help in no time at all. So switching is easier than ever. Activate in minutes from your home or office. Keep your number, keep your phone, switch your number, upgrade your phone, whatever you want to do. Take a stand today and they'll customize it for you at patriotmobile.com/Steve. And you use the promo code Steve, you'll get started with a free month of service as well. All right, so a free month of service at patriotmobile.com/Steve using the offer code Steve. Free month of service to get you started with the offer code Steve at patriotmobile.com/Steve. All right, I'm kind of just going to play referee here, and I feel like someone kind of needs to stick up for the dispensationalists, since it just so happens that the 2 tour guides that we have today, Dr. Scott Hahn and Dr. R.C. Sproul, neither one are. So what you heard from Dr. Hahn with Todd's statement is that he drew a very direct parallel into why Paul would have chosen Elijah specifically as the prophet here to cite, because there's many other examples of God's people, Israel, rebelling against his word and not following what his prophets were telling them to do. So why choose Elijah? And Todd mentioned the northern kingdom. For those of you that don't know, all right, the northern tribes broke away and essentially decided they were going to worship Israel, the God of Israel, on their own terms, and no longer do it in Jerusalem over a religious and political power struggle. And as a result, and of them not repenting and ignoring God's prophets, God sent them a conquering army, who were the most formidable empire in the world up until that point. And the Assyrians invaded the northern 10 tribes in the 7th century, I think it was, 723 BC, something like that, and absolutely annihilated them. Those they did not annihilate, they put bits in their noses and put them on a chain gang and walked them back to Assyria to be prisoners. Some women were left behind. One of the practices the Assyrians would do is they would leave some of the women behind in order to recolonize or repopulate the lands they had just conquered. And so the Assyrians did so and began mating with some of these leftover Jewish concubine sex slaves, prisoners, and eventually it became known as a country known as Samaria. And so when you read the Gospels and you hear the Jews from the southern kingdoms view this as kind of, half-breeds, not really Jews, because they've intermarried with these pagans, that's what this is a reference to, is this sad moment in history. There are 2 tribes that remain. Paul is a member of one of the tribes. He mentions the tribe of Benjamin. He's a member of one of those tribes. Judah is the other one that was still in the southern kingdom and still obeyed the word of the Lord and worshipped him at his temple as commanded. But then they went down to the valley of Tophet, which is a Hebrew word for hell, threw their babies into the fire to worship demons, and for that, God sent them a conqueror to judge them as well in the 5th century, named Nebuchadnezzar, the great king of Babylon, the empire that had conquered Assyria. And this is now where the temple is destroyed. The Ark of the Covenant is lost to history, unless you think it's still in that government building in a crate somewhere. But this is the history that Dr. Hahn is pointing to, and Dr. Hahn is saying that by choosing to use Elijah as the example, and then what became of those northern kingdoms is they were lost to history, the lost tribes of Israel. What is happening is that is essentially what has happened to Israel as a result of their rejection of Messiah. And that the church now is in the place of where Israel once was. Okay with that explanation, Todd?
Yeah.
For now? You okay with that?
Yep.
All right. Now, the dispensationalist response to this would be that God absolutely was right to punish the people for their wickedness. But even with the 10 tribes being wiped out, a remnant of Israel was still protected so that Messiah could come forth, which he did. And that throughout history, even after the 1st century, when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans after the revolt, and the Jewish people were scattered for the next 1,800 some odd years, that even during that period of time, God kept a remnant, just like it says in Romans 11 here. God kept a remnant of Jews to himself, kept those bloodlines. There's very few Jews, only like 2% of Americans are Jews. There's very few Jews in the world. And so they would say that God did that. He did punish them, like you said, but he kept his remnant as well, like Paul said. And he preserved those lines so that they would be here for the time at the end when the nation of Israel, when the tree blooms and the nation of Israel is reconstituted to signal the end of the age. That's how dispensationalists would counter that. Okay? So, Aaron, with that, the floor now is yours.
The only thing I would add is really quickly is that's a really important distinction you made, but the level of clarity that you just described from modern-day dispensationalists juxtaposed to the lack of clarity of one of the greatest prophets, if not the greatest prophets, in terms of what that remnant is and where you find it. And God, like I said, that's why I said this is a God moment where I'm God and you're not, and faith means this one you give totally over to me. You cannot possibly understand what this means until you see it.
I'm going to go through here and read a few highlights from Sproul's exposition on Romans 11, 1 through 10. So Sproul invokes a couple of works. You invoked one, I think, earlier this week, Left Behind, Late Great Planet Earth. Here's what Sproul has to say about this passage. Quote, How we understand eschatology is, to a large degree, connected to how we understand Romans 11. This chapter is Paul's most complete teaching on the future of the nation of Israel. Much of the dispute about eschatology in our time focuses on what, if anything, will still happen with ethnic Israel, the Jews who exist today. When the Six-Day War occurred in the 1960s and Jerusalem was recaptured by the Israelis, theologians were reading the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. In fact, Sproul says since the reconstitution of the Jewish state of Israel in 1948, there has been a strong concentration of interest as to whether we are living in that last generation. Are we living in the end times? Many answers to that question, of course, found locked within Romans 11. For this reason, Sproul says, and I wanted to read his preamble here. For this reason, Sproul says, I approach chapter 11 with a spirit of trepidation. There are some knotty problems in the text. Knotty as in a knot on a tree. Skipping here a couple of paragraphs. Sproul says, I believe it was George Bernard Shaw who once asked a theologian for certain proof of the existence of God, and the theologian replied to Shaw, I can prove the existence of God with one or two words, the Jews. Sproul says, the history of Israel all the way back to Abraham up to present day is a striking testimony of God's providential government of human history, especially redemptive history. The history of ancient Israel is quite remarkable. After the Romans conquered Jerusalem in AD 70, the Jews were dispersed and sent out of their homeland. Despite 2,000 years of exile, they have never lost their ethnic and national identity. Jews say to one another, next year in Jerusalem, for 2,000 years, this people has dreamed of returning to Mount Zion. Sproul says when he was a little boy, there were 2 days during the year in which his mother allowed him to skip school. Quote, one was opening day for the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball season at Forbes Field. The other was St. Patrick's Day, on which the annual Orangeman's Parade was held in Pittsburgh. My grandfather marched in that parade. When I was a baby, my mother sang Irish lullabies to get me to sleep. I also heard stories of my great-grandfather migrating from Ireland to America during the potato famine and settling in Pittsburgh in the middle of the 19th century. While I am aware of my family's roots on the old sod, I don't sit and dream about next year in Dublin. I've been assimilated into the American culture. I do not think of myself as an Irishman. I am an American. We all assimilate except for the Jews. Sproul says they still have an unquenchable awareness of their ethnic and national identity. Paul lamented earlier, in fact, that Israel had missed the gospel by seeking salvation through the law, and now he poses a question about the consequences. Has God exercised a full and final rejection of the Jewish people? Certainly not, as we read in the second part of verse 1. God has not categorically rejected Old Testament Israel, Sproul says. Paul argues from the lesser to the greater. If God had rejected all the Jews, he would have rejected Paul too, because Paul is one of them. Quote, for I am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. Paul cites his pedigree, including a brief recounting of his genealogical background. He traces his roots to the tribe of Benjamin and all the way back to Abraham. God has not cast away his people whom he foreknew, as we read in verse 2. Sproul says God is incapable of rejecting a people he foreknew from the foundation of the world, the elect, of whom Paul has been writing since chapter 8. Here he brings the concept of election to the Jewish people. He wrote earlier, for they are not all Israel who are of Israel. That was back in chapter 9. He argued that the circumcised were not automatically saved, but only those circumcised in heart. Not all from the seed of Abraham were chosen from the foundation of the world. Ishmael was the seed of Abraham, but he remained a foreigner to God's redemptive purposes. Quote, in Isaac your seed shall be called, as we read in chapter 9. Paul does not want his readers to conclude from all the weighty things he has said about the Jews, their rejection of Messiah, and despising the gospel, that God has rejected them totally. Paul's readers cannot come to that conclusion because Paul himself is numbered among the Jews. So that is just the first 1.5 verses of Paul's writings here, but it's obviously something that Sproul, he doesn't just come out and say, you disbe numbnuts, get with the program here. He obviously recognizes that there are, as he puts it, some knotty things here, but he prioritizes the fact that, no, this is not a categorical rejection of the Old Testament Jewish people. This is just election, the doctrine of election brought to the Jews. So that is, I think, what Sproul wanted to highlight, because he obviously put it first, and it's the first couple of verses anyway.
Very fascinating. I mean, what I heard basically is that Dr. Sproul essentially used dispy reasoning to, and even, what are sometimes referred to as dispensational tropes, he actually acknowledged them.
Yes, that surprised me.
But then actually used that to make the case for his view, not on necessarily replacement as much as election.
Correct.
Actually,
Correct.
That election, whether we're talking about a remnant of Jews at the end or in any period of time, or a remnant of anybody, because it's always a remnant. Not everyone is saved. It's just always a remnant. So it's election, no matter what era, whether we're talking soterology or eschatology, it's a remnant. That's essentially what Sproul is saying.
Yes.
Fascinating. That's a fascinating. I would imagine that would have made him a very difficult foe for dispensationalists to debate, because he's actually accepting some of their own nomenclature in the making of his own argument, which sounds to me a lot like maybe what, Spurgeon's view, by the way. Spurgeon was preaching during the advent of dispensationalism, and he was a vehement critic of it. At the same time, Spurgeon also thought that he was open to the possibility that the remnant that Paul refers to in Romans 11 could, at the end of the age, be another iteration of the nation of Israel. And of course, he was discussing these things, 75, 80 years before it actually happened.
I think
it sounds
Sproul,
like maybe they had maybe Spurgeon and Sproul had some similar views on this.
Sproul, once again, I don't know. I might be putting words in the Catholic's mouth, but he kind of does the Catholic thing with eschatology, and I don't say that disparagingly at all. But when
Todd's kind of thing, I'm Catholic, I'm not going to get in the weeds on this.
Yeah, because in terms of primacy, in terms of what should be emphasized, in terms of our priorities, the exact details of the end of days should be so far down the list. While at the same time, there are people who are in the Reformed world, and I'm very sympathetic to this. Not only sympathetic, I tend to agree with it in most circumstances, that eschatology is missiology. How you view the world playing out is how you are going to do your mission today, which is to not only not only to evangelize, but to make disciples. And Todd just seemed to agree with that. So I do think he kind of does the Catholic thing, whereas, hey, this is the main point here. Let's not lose sight of that. With all of our novels, with all as well written as they may be, with all of our newspapers in one hand and Bibles in the other hand, the message here, the prime message here, is election, salvation, not necessarily some view of how you think that plays out in the end. So if you want to call that ducking on this part of Sproul, I'm sure he gets into the weeds even more later. But I just think I'm reading, I'm trying to glean his heart or motivation from what he's written, and it seems to me that this is what is actually primarily important here, not some sort of view of how history plays out.
So we got about 2 minutes here to wrap this up. Let me come full circle to where I started it. Even if you decide to utterly reject the concepts of dispensationalism, and even if you want to fully subscribe to Dr. Hahn drawing a direct parallel between Elijah as the prophet to a doomed people, a people that God will literally erase from history, the northern kingdom, just erase them, they're gone, the lost tribes, and you want to attribute that to the contemporary Jewish people. Have you noticed that at any point of me during my vehement pushback against anti-Semitism, that not only has Todd disagreed with me, he's actually supported me? Why? Because love your neighbor as you love yourself still is the law. That still is in force, regardless of your eschatological view. It's still a commandment from your Lord, who himself was born to a Jewish family. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself, regardless of your eschatological view. If you want to argue vehemently because dispensationalism is wrong, it should no longer be a facet of how America conducts its foreign policy, given the consequences therein, by all means, make that argument. But if that argument turns you into an anti-Semite, then you have violated love your neighbor as you love yourself. And that's more important than your particular view, frankly, of the eschatological significance of this nation of Israel. That's not the first thing, but it's the second thing. Love your neighbor as you love yourself, which means it's still pretty darn important. So I hope you guys grew in knowledge over the course of this discussion. Again, I mean, whole volumes of DVDs and CDs and podcasts could be produced on this debate alone, but we did the best we could as laymen with the limited intellect that we have. All right, go hard, Romans 8:28.